Hello, welcome to week 11, lecture 53. Today we will talk about our experience of field linguistics. Field linguistics is an important aspect of linguistics because in the field we collect data and you know that there are various applications of data. So how do we collect data, what do we do in the field, what are the ethics related to that? We will discuss all these today. So, we will also share our experiences of field for language Toto, language Coda. So, when we go to field, you know that we prepare our questionnaires, and before that we do a pilot survey or we get a basic idea about how to collect data. And if you can remember, I have already talked about designing questionnaires, how there are different types of questionnaires, how do we design those. So, when we went to Totopara for collecting Toto data, what did we do? We first got a very basic idea about this region, and Toto is a very isolated type of language in the sense that geographically it is quite isolated. There is a small river which we need to cross and go to Totopara. It is a beautiful area, but then it is also little difficult. So, field linguists, they also face different types of difficulties, logistic difficulties, and also it is very challenging to explore or to analyze the new data for unexplored languages. So, what we did was that we designed our questionnaire with different types of questions in it. We had picture books, we had smaller videos and all those things, and we went to the field. In the field, we came across different types of things, and so we also clicked pictures of those and then we tried to collect names of those items. So, these were all part of our questionnaires, and basically in the first part we were using translation method followed by narrations and collection of folklores and folk songs, and we also came to know about different aspects of folk songs and folklores which are not very common for other languages. So, when we go to field, we not only collect or we do not only stick to our questionnaire, we also observe, and it is very important to keep notes of our observations. So, there are various types of observations. Sometimes the language experts, they tell us something, but we may observe something very opposite to that. So, I would like to share one of the experience where one of the language activists, we can say, he said that he is very keen to save his language and in his house only he used Toto. But when we asked his son, a little child, to sing a Toto song, he actually sang a Bollywood song and he did not know how to sing a Toto song. So, that is what we observed, but when we were interviewing the person, we got some other type of answers. So, there can be different types of observations. Both are important actually. When we are asking and getting some replies, those are also important. You can't say that those are lies or those are myths. They are part of the language attitude. Maybe that person really wants to save the language, really wants to work for the language. But the situation is such that his son is learning Bollywood songs, is not learning or not getting scope to learn Toto songs. So, we need to get both the perspectives. We need to know the fact. We also need to know what people believe about their language, about their community. So, that is what we do in the field. So, when we can also invite language experts in a studio and get the data recorded, we do that sometimes. But why it is important to visit a field and collect data? Because in the field we get the idea about the whole community. We get to see how do they stay, how do they perform different rituals, what are their attitude towards their language and what are real practices. So, all these things we can only know when we are in the field. So, field exposure is quite important for a field linguist for collecting real data. And these data can be useful for ethno-linguistic studies, for documentation, for basic phonological description, for different types of uses these data can be used. So, when we go to field, we collect data, we keep notes of them, Along with that, we also keep a track of language experts. We get detailed information about them, about their background, socio-economic background, their educational background, everything. And we also keep a contact of them so that next time we can contact them. And it's always advisable that when we go to field, we collect data, we give them something in return. So it's nothing like take and give thing, but it is something like a memory, like when you are leaving the field, you give them a token of memory, or you give them something to show your gratitude towards them. And at the same time, in Toto field, we actually got a very good farewell from the people of Totopada. They actually, different people came to meet us. We were there for a week, and in this week we had a great time. We collected data in the morning at 5 a.m. Before even brushing our teeth, we were going to field collecting data, and we actually, in a very short time, we became very friendly with the people of those areas. And when we were leaving at that day, lots of people came to meet us. They also gifted us certain things, and it was a sad farewell actually, but a very enriching experience. So when we came back from the field, what did we do with the data? So will you talk about that? What did we do with the data when we returned back from the field?
Yes. So when we come back from the field, we do have the recorded data that we collect from the field. So what do we mean by recorded data? We have recordings of words, we have recordings of sentences, we also have recordings of some narrations. So we try to transcribe them. Now you have already learnt about IPA in this course. So you know what does transcription mean. So when we transcribe on the field, we try to tally it with the recorded data. We try to see if we have missed something out when we have actually transcribed it, because when we collect data from the field, the speaker speaks fluently and then we try to transcribe the data with IPA. So there can be errors. So it's our job to check the transcription and match it with the recording. So we do that, and then we also gloss them with Leipzig glossing rules. We have also learnt about Leipzig glossing rules in this course. So you know what it means. So we try to gloss the data with Leipzig glossing rule. And then comes the part when we have to analyze the data. The analysis can be done from various points of view. You have learnt about different levels of linguistics. So you have some idea about different kind of linguistic analysis that we discussed in the course. So when we have data from field, we can use say phonological analysis. So when we collect words, from the words we get minimal pairs, and with the help of minimal pairs we create the phoneme inventory of languages, and try to if our focus is phonology, we also try to focus on phonological rules. Similarly, from the sentences we try to analyze the morphology and syntax based analysis with the data. And if we are focusing on the narratives, there can be discourse analysis oriented analysis as well. Apart from that, we can also do sociolinguistic analysis of the data. As Bornini already mentioned, attitude is a major part. So when we have certain data, you can have code mixed utterances that you have learnt in sociolinguistics. So if I try to see, for example, in Totopada we were finding some Nepali elements mixed with Toto. So we were considering the code mixing factors as well. So if we want to do sociolinguistic analysis, there are a couple of factors that we can consider. After the analysis, we need to do a validation. So when we do the validation, we often validate it through the native speakers. At times we invite the native speakers to a studio or a setup where we can validate the data, or we can also make another visit to validate the data that we have already collected in order to be sure that the grammaticality is okay. You have some idea about grammaticality by now. And after validation, we have to archive the data. So we can do different kind of archivings. We can use some software in order to do archiving, and we can also, some of you have heard about the word called metadata. So, we can also prepare metadata for the data that we have collected. So, we need to archive the data. So, these are the steps of data collection that we do after coming back from the field. And now I would like to ask you to talk about the ethical aspects of data collection. We know that when we collect data, we have to keep in mind certain ethical aspects. So, will you talk about them now?
Yes, I will talk about that, but before that I will also try to remind you of the language attitude thing that you mentioned. So, we of course in the field we get to know about the attitude of the language speakers, but at the same time we also get to know about the attitude from the other community members. So, do you remember that there was a person who was a driver and who was not a Toto speaker. So, he was from a different community. So, we could see that how there are also representations of other language speakers in that area, and what was their attitude towards Toto language. So, when we are in the field, we can know about that. So, if we are inviting the speakers and collecting data, we will never know about that, because only we invite the speakers in a studio and collect data. But if we are in the field, we get to know about that. Similarly, we also went to the school and we collected data and attitude from them. So, will you like to talk a little about that?
Sure, sure. And along with that, when we are talking about attitude, I think it is also important for us to talk about the multilingualism associated with the community, because when we visited the Toto school, we found that the teachers who are not from the community, because there are very few people from the community who have actually experienced higher level learning. So, there are teachers who have mastery in Bangla and Nepali, but some of them are saying they are trying to learn Toto, and some of them said that there is no need to learn Toto. So, we clearly found the differences among teachers, and this is on one hand reflection of the multilingual nature of the community. On the other hand, in a single area we can find different kind of attitudes. So, some teachers are willing to learn the language, and we also found a teacher who wrote songs, composed songs in Toto, after learning the language from the students. She actually composed songs and then taught it. She made sure that every Friday there is a class where community children will be learning songs of their own language in order to protect their language. On the other hand, some teachers directly told us that they do not want the students to speak Toto because that is a bad language, and instead they should learn either Bangla or Nepali, and the school was Bengali medium. So, when we comment on multilingualism, we need to pay attention to the role of formal institutions like school. So, though the community uses Nepali as a second language, and they also have an influence of Nepali in their popular culture like YouTube videos, etc. But the school is basically offering them books in Bangla. So, this is a unique combination of different languages in terms of multilinguality, and also we can see different attitudes, right?
Yes. We also saw smaller hostels where Toto boys, younger Toto boys were staying. So, they got good food, good education and stayed in those smaller hostels, and in those hostels also we found that there was influence or dominance of Bangla. So, they were young kids. So, from those children from that young age were influenced or dominated by Bangla. So, that becomes a little, makes Toto more vulnerable. So, that is also what we witnessed. Though on the other side we also met some of the people who were writing songs, as you mentioned, and they were writing songs about the modern concepts, about going to school, about the different things. So, earlier songs were more about the nature, about the beauty of Totopara, climbing hills and all, but now the modern songs were on modern problems. So, we could also see that there were some people who were trying to revitalize or use more Toto in their day to day life. So, that also we witnessed, we saw a balance of both of that. Now coming to ethical aspect, when we visit a field, we should take some of the ethical measures. Before going to field we have to, or in the field we have to take some ethical measures, and also when we return back from the field, then also we need to take some ethical measures. So in the field what do? Whenever we are collecting data or if we are documenting a language, we need to have permission of the language speakers. So it is easy in translation method, because before asking them questions, we ask them for their permission, we tell them why we are collecting the data, what we will do with the recording. So all these things should be very clear. And at times we take their signature, we ask them to read the form in which we have all the details about the projects, about the purpose of collecting data and all this, and then we ask them to sign it. At times people, they might not be able to read it, so we read these things to them and we record the whole session. So we read this thing to them and then they say whether they agree to this recording or not, and this whole thing is recorded, so that we have a proof that they have agreed to it. And if they don't agree, maybe they don't want the session to be recorded, or they are too busy, we can't force them, we can't say no, you will have to do it. So that is very important. So in questionnaire method it's easy, but in other methods like 2 or 3 people, community members, they are discussing something and you want to record it. So what do? Or you saw a certain thing, certain ritual, and you want to record it. So one way is that you take permission before recording. Another thing is that maybe at that very moment it's not possible for you to take the permission, because already the event is going on and you reach there and the event is going on, so you can't interrupt and take permission. So you can record the whole session, and after this thing is over, you can take permission from all the members who were involved in the maybe a performance or a ritual, whatever. So that is very important. And if they say no, we don't want our ritual to be recorded, then you should delete that. So that is very important. As a linguist or as an researcher, you should not feel like I will secretly keep this. That is totally unethical and unacceptable. So, and ethical issues have become very important nowadays globally. If you have to present your data or if you have to publish your data, at times they ask for the ethical forms or ethical permissions. So nowadays ethical issues have become very important. So one should be very conscious about this. Another thing is that when we return from the field, we have in some cases seen that scholars or researchers, they write just anything about people, about the community from where they have collected data. So those things are actually very unethical. You can write the facts, you can write about the analysis, about your observations, but then one should not write things which will hurt the community. Because what happens then, the community of course knows about it, and then they don't welcome other researchers. They feel bad that okay, we gave you time, we gave you data, and then you are writing negative things about us. So that is very unethical practice. Another unethical practice that we see is that people manipulate with data. So that is again a very unethical thing to do. People collect data for one language, make some manipulation and present it as the data of some other language. So that is again very unethical. Or maybe you have certain hypothesis, and to prove your hypothesis you are manipulating the data. So these are some of the practices which are actually done by some of the scholars, but then it is very unethical and it should not be encouraged and it should not be done. So because these are unethical and unacceptable things. So these are some of the important aspects of ethics related to field work. So now when we get the data and we come back, what do we do with the data? Will you talk about it?
Yes. So when we have the data, then as I told you briefly, we can do linguistic analysis based on the data and for academic purpose. So maybe you are thinking about some theory and your data is talking about those kind of theoretical idea, then you can conduct analysis So, when I was talking about language variation, I hope you remembered that I gave example of Rajbongshi, the language on which I have worked and I still work. So, I told you that there are certain models of language variation which can be used to analyze the language variation data of Rajbongshi. So, similarly, if you are planning to work on some theoretical aspects, you can conduct the structural linguistic analysis based on the data. We can also do socio-linguistic analysis of the data. For example, we can work on language change in a community. So, what kind of changes are taking place? Is it related to sound change only, or it is something else, maybe change is taking place at syntactic level. We work on language maintenance and shift, and specifically for languages like Toto, it is very important to talk about language shift, because the external pressures are basically forcing the community members to shift their language and adopt more so called powerful language. So, we need to analyze them as well, and we also look at the code mixing related factors in sociolinguistics when we do analysis, and we analyze attitudes within the community, attitudes by speakers of other adjacent communities who live in the same area, whether there is a negative attitude which is basically forcing the language to community members to shift the language, for example. We also conduct analysis of typological features. You have already learnt about areal features and language contact. So, whether there are areal features in the data that we have collected. So, before going to the field, we already do some background studies on the area and the languages. So, we also try to see whether there are like common features or something which is new, which is a new innovation. And as you have already mentioned, we need to think about giving back to the community. So, this is actually a very important part of field work. So, we can give back to the community in different ways. So, we can create some grammar based on the language that we collect data on. And when we are saying grammar, of course, we are talking about descriptive grammar. I already told you the difference between descriptive and prescriptive grammar. So, we are not we generally do not write prescriptive grammar. We describe the rules of language in terms of different structures, and we write descriptive grammars and give it to the community. So, the community should use it for their own purposes. So, for example, they can use it for teaching others or consult some material. We create dictionaries. So, now there are some softwares which we use like Flex, which are useful for creating dictionaries. So, we can feed data to the software and get output, dictionary output. So, we create dictionaries. At times these are like only 2 languages, and we also create trilingual dictionaries at times. If you find that there are 4 languages available in the community, you can incorporate all to create a dictionary. And along with that, we also create teaching materials, teaching learning materials for the community's use. So, it is not the case that these are always used in schools. These are also used for informal learning, home based learning, where simply the elders can teach the younger generation members. So, our data can be useful. And we can also create app with the data that we collect. So, at this point let me tell you that we work on Mundari, and recently we have created an app with Mundari language from IIT Kharagpur, and this app is basically helping the children to learn their own language Mundari, which most of them do not use. So, in the area where we collected the data from, which is actually not very far from our campus, in parts of Jhargram and West Medinipur area of West Bengal. So, we collected the data, and with the vocabulary data of different semantic domains, we chose particular domains and created language games through the app. So, then after creating the app, we also tested it with the children. We gave it to the community children and just to see whether they like it or not, and we found that they are actually playing it. And let me also tell you that the small instructions in the app are also written in Mundari. It is not that we are using the other dominant languages like Odia, Bangla or Hindi. We used Mundari for small instructions for playing the games through language.
And that was also in speech as well. So, it was both audio
yes,
and you can in text. So, you can actually listen to the instructions or you can read.
Yes, anything that you prefer. It was when we tested the app with the children actually asked us if we have more games. So, it gave us the feedback that it is actually enjoyable for them, and they are asking for more such activities based on vocabulary. So, when it's a language game through the app that we have designed, it is serving another purpose, which is basically to protect the language, save the language, and also to save it for the new generation users. So, we did talk about the generational differences when we discussed language shift and maintenance, if you remember. So, this app created with our collected data basically helped in the use of language, which promoted the use of language among new generation users. So,
and do you remember that some of these children, they could not remember some of the words and they were asking the elders.
Yes.
So, in the games there were some pictures and they had to match it with the correct word. So, when they didn't know it, they were actually asking their elders, what do we call this item, what do we. So, that was actually giving more scope of use of the language. So, the children were talking to their parents about the language in the language. So, that
and grandparents.
And grandparents, yes. So, that was opening the domain of language use. And so, we know that when we collect data, this data can be used for various language technologies. So, build language technology. So, this was actually part of it. This app had speech instructions in Mundari. This app had 3 languages, basically English, Bangla and Mundari. So, if someone wants to learn English using Mundari, one can do that, and at the same time one can play in Mundari to know more about Mundari. So, this app was created with the data that was collected, as she mentioned. So, we know that when we collect data, we can use it for various types of purpose and also for creating language technologies. Nowadays, we also create multimodal dictionaries where we listen to the sound, we can read the text and we can also see pictures related to that particular word. So, all these can be actually created by collecting data, because for the minor or endangered languages, we do not find data, we do not have a corpus based on which we can create language technologies. So, for that it becomes very important for us to collect data directly from the field. We need primary data, and then when we get the primary data along with other things, we also can build different types of language technologies based on that, which can be related to speech technology, which can be related to other type of technologies, which can be very encouraging for the community members to use their language. Because we know that the children were very excited to get the app. They for the first time they were seeing something in their language in the mobile. So, they were playing in their mobiles and it was very exciting for them to see that in their own mobiles or in their own devices.
It is also important for attitude. Like you remember when we were working on Coda language. So, we found some speakers who said that now we have our data which is available on some website. So, this is, I mean, when we present our data through some medium, it is also changing their attitude.
Yes. So, when we see that the language can be used in different domains and especially in technological world, then it of course adds more prestige and gives a positive attitude for the language speakers. So, that was about today's discussion. I hope you enjoyed the discussion today. It was more about real life experiences with linguistics that we shared today. So, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.